Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is David Skeen. I am the Associate Publisher of On-Site Magazine. I'm happy to say that today's event, Taking the Leap, How to Select, Set Up, and Succeed with Specialized Estimating Software, is sponsored by B2W Software. B2W offers a unified platform for estimating and operations, and this year celebrates its 25th year of innovation with products designed to streamline heavy construction workflows from resource scheduling and field tracking to equipment maintenance and data capture. Their expertise in construction estimating has enabled them to assist thousands of organizations making the move to specialized software. And of course, they are delighted today to be joined by two of Canada's top contractors for our discussion on the topic. Before I hand the session over, however, I have just a few simple housekeeping items. First of all, a recording of this session will be sent to each of the attendees, so if for any reason you have to leave early or want to share it with friends, you will have that available to you. And secondly, if you can ask questions by typing them in the questions panel, do that at any time during the broadcast, and we will attempt to answer as many questions as possible in approximately about 15 minutes or so towards the end of the event. With that introduction, I'd now like to turn the session over to Lisa Clark, B2W's Vice President of Marketing, who will introduce our panel.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone, and thanks to On-Site Magazine for allowing us to host this really important conversation. As David mentioned earlier, we have some veteran estimators from two of Canada's top construction firms with us today, and I can't wait to tell you all about them. So let's go. First is Michelle Kirk with Priestley Demolition, and they're based in King, Ontario, Canada. For those of you who don't already know them, Priestley is a family-owned and operated company. They work across a lot of different industries, and they've seen huge growth, really since starting out in 1971. As operations coordinator there, Michelle was a really big part of the team that selected and implemented their estimating software, and that was, I think, early last year. She'll be sharing some of the insights from that process. Also, as a very cool side note about Priestley, I just discovered they're going to be featured in a new TV series for the History Channel called Salvage Kings, where their crews pick up valuable items from demo sites worth restoring and reusing. It's sort of a Dirty Jobs meets pawnbrokers. Anyway, I'm so thrilled for them and seriously can't wait to see it. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, next we have Sean Firth. Sean has been a senior estimator with Birmingham Foundation Solutions in Hamilton, Ontario for the past 5 years. Before that, he worked as an estimator for the Miller Group and also did some project and QC work for Lafarge and some others. So Birmingham is another great Canadian success story, and they have been for a very long time. Founded over 120 years ago, they are the country's oldest foundation contractor, taking on really everything from buildings and power plants to railways and other heavy civil construction projects. I understand they also do design, 3D modeling, and even some equipment manufacturing. You can certainly learn more about them at their website, which is birminghammer.com. So great to have you with us today, Sean, and I know that you're driving back from a meeting, so I especially appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to a good session.
Terrific. So before we turn things over to these guys for some advice and best practices, I'm going to assume that everyone on this call is thinking the same thing, right? It's time to take the leap. And for fun last night, I went through the list of things that we hear from companies in pretty much the same headspace. Typically stuff like, we're growing, our projects are getting more complex, the margin pressure is killing us, I waste way too much time searching for cost information, and there's just too much data entry. And maybe one of the scariest things we hear, though, is that, our estimator is retiring, and how are we going to avoid mistakes, right? All that historical knowledge. And really, to fix any of these things, you can either hire an army of small estimators, or you can find a suitable tool to get the job done right. I was reading Capterra was saying that by holding on to sort of traditional costing methods, more than half of today's heavy construction estimators are not as efficient as they could be. So that seems a little alarming. So anyway, we want to talk about software, and we want to talk about how you get there successfully. There's some great benefits to software, as you would imagine, right? It helps you standardize your approach, lets you quote different jobs more easily, more varied jobs, maybe a central or shared cost database and other features like reporting and checking for errors, and can be super useful for winning bids. Integration with other systems like accounting and ERPs is another really great idea. One of my favorites anyway, is the ability to export bids directly to your field tracking app or field log. And you know what? It's not even on this slide, but typically software is way easier to use. And if it isn't, or isn't built for your line of work, that might just be a recipe for failure anyway. Okay, so bear with me for a second. I'm going to ask Melissa to launch two short polls to help us size up the audience for our panel today. And Sean, we'll read you the results. So I think the poll has just been launched. Go ahead and take a minute or a moment to click one of the buttons that best describes your estimating team or your situation today. Terrific. Thank you, everybody who's writing in. So, wow. So almost 60% of the folks on the line today have, 3 or more. Actually, more than 65% have 3 or more estimators on their team, and about 10% are the lone estimator. But it's a group. It's definitely a group effort. So thank you. Okay, let's launch the next poll, and this is about what is your prevailing estimating method. And go ahead and take a minute when that comes up to, one of the options on here would be maybe missing, right? Which is potentially a mixed approach, but you guys know better than anyone that every dollar your firm earns, begins with the estimate. And so how much of that reaches the bottom line really depends on the process and how you manage it. It looks like about half are using specialized software already. And there's probably another 45% or so that are using spreadsheets and more traditional methods of paper and pencil. So thank you guys for that. Let's go back to the slides now quickly. All right, hopefully you can all see that. So I don't keep Sean and Michelle waiting sort of 1 second longer. Here are the 5 areas that we're going to be exploring with them today. How to identify a need for estimating software, how to select the right tool, and then get it set up and then get it rolled out, and how to know if it's a success. So these are the 5 areas we're going to be addressing today. Okay, moving into our first one. Michelle and Sean, we're going to take each one of these one at a time, starting with what drove you to have a look around for a new approach and the key requirements you uncovered along the way. And to our audience, just a reminder, as David mentioned, you can use the chat function if you have questions for the panelists along the way. And we'll get to as many of them as we can at the very end. Sean, let's start with you. Give us some insight into your organization. How big is your team? What sorts of things drove your estimating software requirements, and who did you involve in the process? Michelle, we'll go to you next. Sean?
Okay, so basically to start from the genesis of it, as you mentioned at the outset of the interview, I've been with the Birmingham Group for about 5 years now. We started way back on an Excel-based system. At that time, it was myself and another gentleman that were taking the lion's share of the estimating, kind of bringing in project managers as required for some overflow. And pretty quickly, a need was identified that we needed something that was a little bit more robust and a little bit more scalable. So now that we kind of identified the need, this was about a year or so ago now, we've identified the need. We've decided that we needed to go out to market and see what the best tool was available for us. There's several commercially available softwares out there, and we did our due diligence, and of course we ended up settling on bid to win. Just again, basically their scalability of the matter. We involved all of the stakeholders in the company. So it was myself, the estimating manager, vice president of estimating, right up to our president to make such an informed decision. It's it's a large capital purchase for some companies, and ourselves notwithstanding. Now we have a team of 5 people that are dedicated in the department with several support staff, and we're looking at growing as well again shortly. We're lucky that Ontario is a very robust market at this point, and the growth is happening and will happen. And again, back to that scalability thing.
It sounds a lot like how our company started out going with all of this too. I've been with Priestley for about 2 years now, and I started as the estimating coordinator. So I was involved right from the beginning, going through all of our bids and setting everything up. Our team of 5 estimators were working on over 100 estimates every month, and kind of old style spreadsheets and paper and pencil, and going everything that way. Everything was approved by one manager. We just really needed a way to partially automate to be able to do a lot more and just increase the function for everybody.
Yeah, great.
So this are across all industries. So demolition happens to every building in every area, so it has to be really customizable for us.
Sounds good. So this was a very strategic decision for both of your businesses, it sounds like, and scalability and flexibility was definitely part of it. Were there any requirements around integration, for example, accounting systems, ERP, field systems, anything like that?
For us, we use Webcast currently for our accounting system, so we really needed something integrated with that.
Sean?
Yeah, again, we've got a fairly similar story. We've got an established accounting practice with our accounting guys, and we needed to make sure that when we implement Bid to Win, we've actually just purchased the track module, which will be implemented fully as of January 1. So that will be across everything. That will be accounting, that will be payroll. Basically, as I said before, we've kind of gone in full value with this. And to touch on something that I kind of glossed over before, the focus in Ontario recently, I'm sure everybody's noticed this, seems to be away from the smaller projects and into the much grander projects. So we need to be able to save time, save effort, increase the repeatability, and make life easier for the estimating team and the operations team. Make sure that we capture everything properly and concisely.
Right. That sounds great. Were there any specific things, Sean, in your business in terms of the complexity of those bids that were driving your requirements as well?
Yeah, I mean, the complexity of the bids, as I said before, we were working on an Excel-based program. So what happens as the big bids got bigger is we had a fairly intense macro program, and every time I tried to refresh an estimate, or one of the other estimators tried to refresh an estimate to rebalance it or what have you, we'd see a slowdown. And at one point, it was in the order of several minutes every time we tried to rebalance the bid, because there was so much going on in the background. That luckily doesn't happen in commercially available software, of course, right? It's been designed out, and it's been vetted, it's been stress tested, and it makes our life easier and more efficient, which is at the end of the day what we all need.
Okay, great. Well, again, if anyone has questions for them on this step in the process, go ahead and use your chat function, and we'll get to them. But moving right along, I think that after identifying those needs, which is really important to understand, end to end, to ensure the success of the program. I guess we all know the buying process or evaluating the options. That's really changed today. I think the stat is something like 70% of the buying process is done, online before you even engage a vendor. And you can find lots of stuff, even like user reviews on the web, just by Googling it. And I'm sure that's not a bad thing in terms of collecting information, but that's certainly not enough. Michelle, let's start with you this time. And what was your approach to researching options based on your requirements list, and who led that initiative?
So our president was really involved and really excited about launching a software to be used instead of kind of our old system. So him, along with our estimators, teamed up to see exactly what we wanted out of a software. We looked a lot at the takeoff softwares at first, but we'll do the takeoff, use the calculation, and spit out kind of a dollar value or a unit rate. And we wanted something that was a lot more robust than that. Something that can add in, like you're saying, negotiating the margin. So I want to test the difference between the 30% markups or around what that's going to be, and I want to look at different options. And we needed something that gave us that advantage. So we looked at stacks, looked at using PlanSwift on its own and different systems like that, and we really came across to Bidjoin as being the best option for us.
Okay. Sean, what about your process? Who was involved in that, and how did that go for you in terms of locating, or shortlisting, I should say, vendors?
So, I mean, there's essentially, I'm lucky enough I was the driver in a lot of the early process, and I have had hands-on experience with B2W in my previous life at the Miller Group, as you mentioned earlier. So I was already quite familiar with it. We brought on an estimating manager from another large general contractor in Ontario here who also uses B2W. So the integration was more natural and more seamless after the need was identified, after we identified the slowdowns and what have you. It was a pretty quick conversation. Basically, we vetted the two major competitors for the commercially available software and picked what we liked, what we knew. And to touch on Priestley's point about the scalability as well, because we're more positioned in the market as a subcontractor generally, something that happens quite often is for us when we're negotiating a contract is either a reduction or an increase in the scope. What we can do very easily beyond our homebrewed solution before was now we can run different scenarios. We can duplicate an estimate and we can have different scenarios done in a matter of minutes, if not hours at the most. So it's very, again, very time sensitive and very efficient. So that's what drew us to you guys.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, how many vendors did you look at in your selection, and how did the vendors support you in that process?
So after kind of the initial just sweep of what's available, we really narrowed it down to like a top 3, and then from there, there was phone calls and demos showing what screens look like, how to flip through. We had meetings on site demoing the software and really showing how it would work for our business, so we could ask those industry-specific questions. So I can say to them, well, we're doing 3 different types of work in the same building. How would you use it? And kind of get feedback. And it was really helpful for us to actually feel it and touch it and look at what was going on. And it made a big difference.
Back to actually for both of you, because you both have relatively large more than one estimators and complex bids. How important was it to have multiple estimators working on a bid together or at the same time simultaneously?
Okay, I can start actually with that. I've got an example from this morning. We were going through a bid review with another one of our estimators, and with our VP of operations, he said, well, you know what, guys? I don't really agree with the crew that you have here. I think we should be a little bit different here. So while they were going through the bid review with the main estimator, I was sitting on a second computer making the changes to the crews. It happened live. There was no interference between the two of us. He was out of the item. I was in the item. And we didn't have to think about it again. The change was made, the change was done, and we moved on with life.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, that really creates a lot of efficiency. Michelle, how about you? You've got a team of estimators. What,
Yeah,
how
we have
important
a team of 5 estimators here. So it's really helpful when someone's on the go. You can kind of pick up where they left off and help each other out. It's a family business, like you said, so it's a family environment here in the office too. And if one person has to run to a mandatory meeting, someone else can pick up and send their tender out for them or send their bid, and we can cover everything off really quickly and seamlessly.
Mm-hmm. So related to that, you're both running, lots of bids, and you've got bigger teams. When you were evaluating your software options, how much did support come into play in your decision when you talk about, long-term investments in software like this? Sean, why don't you take this one?
It was a major decision. Again, what we don't want to do is, I've been in the midst of closing jobs in the past on, for example, a Sunday, and I have a software issue. If I call B2W on a Sunday because I have an issue, they always have somebody on staff waiting to help. And not only that, but if you have to answer the phone and call back, know the software. May not be 100% familiar with our exact industry, of course, but they know the software in and out, and we can work through issues cold. Again, in estimating, time deadlines are hard. They're immovable. So if we miss a deadline, we can miss millions of dollars of opportunity. We can't afford that. We need to be able to be, again, touching back on that efficiency thing, we always need to be as efficient as we can. And that helps us, even when there's an issue. It's not so much if there's an issue, but when there's an issue, if we have support, it's much easier to manage.
Right. Okay, so that was a big part of the decision in choosing a vendor. All right, why don't we move along to our next topic then, which is implementation. I know we're moving through this very quickly. We're trying to be cognizant of time, certainly. I think as important as choosing the right, solution against your requirements is deploying it, right? So preparing your implementation can include, several functions from business owners and estimators, as we've talked about, to IT. Sean, I'm going to give you this one. How did you go about the implementation, and how important, for example, was communication? And are there any things that you would advise folks as they prepare to implement estimating software? Maybe things that you would have done differently? That's a big question.
So things I would do differently. I mean, the nice thing is with the professional staff that B2W has, they've run through it thousands of times. They know what they're doing. They helped us, who was relatively ignorant to the process, through it. So what we received, once we wrote the purchase order, we started to talk with the implementation managers on B2W's side, and then soon enough in our email inbox popped in an Excel spreadsheet. We populated that Excel spreadsheet for bid to win to implement into our database, which we have offsite on a third-party server. And soon enough, we were up, we were running, we were live, we were making tweaks. Again, pretty seamless once we got onto that. And again, kind of from beginning to end, it was what could have been a very tedious process was done well and efficiently, and within several months of writing the purchase order and having it done 100% properly.
Michelle, what was your experience with the implementation? Do you have any advice for the audience or anything that you would like to share in terms of your process?
Yeah, our process was very similar, filling out the spreadsheet and having that information, talking with the implementation team. It was all really helpful. We pulled all of our information that we had previously recorded in our accounting software to just do a once-over before we set up our resources. What are we actually spending? Is there anything that we need to tweak from our old spreadsheets to our new data, just to refresh and make sure we're getting the most up-to-date information into our new system. So there was a lot of help going along back and forth through that, and it worked out really well, and it gave us a good base to start looking at, well, what do we need for a crew? And we'll build these first crews and work up from there and make it easier for our estimators to kind of pop in and start working right away once everything was ready to go.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about crews, you're talking about building the templates?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, can you take us through that?
So for building the crew templates, it just makes sure that we know exactly, whenever I have this machine, I'll need these 3 attachments, and I'll need an operator, and I'll need a laborer to help with changing the attachments and going back and forth. And it helps because we'll know which machines we have oil clicks as well in our machine. So those machines don't need as much attention when you're changing attachments. So you don't need the same amount of labor that goes along with the crew that doesn't have and has a different type of connection system. So it helped us be really specific, and every minute and every hour counts. So when you can build that into your estimate and know how productive you're going to be and know the time it's going to take just to even use your own equipment between all of your different tasks, it makes it so much easier to just flow through after the estimate and once we've got the job. So we got the resources built, started working on crew templates, so then we know exactly what crews can do what, and then you can move it up to task templates. And then the task templates are really what you use to plan your work. So I'm going to be working on concrete slab removal today, and I'll need this crew. And it just makes it so you can visualize the work as you're building the program.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That sounds pretty easy. All right. Well, once it's rolled out, yeah, no, I know it was a lot of once it's rolled out, right, no matter how carefully it was selected or, how well installed it was, it certainly won't be successful if you don't have buy-in from the end users, the people who are going to be using this every day. And that's for sure the golden rule. Michelle, were there any particular challenges you needed to address as you introduced estimating software at Priestley, and how did you overcome these? Any secrets or steps to ensuring user adoption that you can share?
I guess as a case for what happened when we were enrolling is we brought on a new estimator to help with the team right when we were implementing as well. And he'd come from a company that used a different software and a different system. And there was a bit of a mentality that, the way I was doing it worked great. So I don't know why you're using this new software. And they wanted to kind of do it their own way. So bringing them on board was a little bit of a sticking point for us of switching them over and having them see the light as well with what we'd seen and wanting to use the system. So what we did to help get him on board was made him a key part of creating the cruise. So put him in charge of getting stuff working.
Right.
So it worked really well. He became more passionate about it and now knows the system better than anyone else.
That's great. You turned him into a champion. That's a great strategy.
We did.
Yeah. Sean, how about you? What was your process of ensuring user adoption like?
So again, we're fairly lucky. We're a very close team that works together. I've been personally selling the whole kind of B2W suite since I got here. So the estimating manager, as I mentioned before, came from a large general contractor. He knows B2W inside out. I knew it from a previous life. We're both very passionate about it. So we were able to convey the passion about that to our mid-level senior, junior guys and get them to actually want to use it and get them to see the efficient. We showed them the demonstration videos online as well as, kind of gave them a bit of a hands-on. What we did during implementation to make sure that it was done properly was our estimating manager and I were the only two that kept access to it for the first month. What we would do is we would run stress tests, we would run shadow bids, we would make sure that everything was done properly before we rolled it out with the training team, with our other guys. And once that was done, and we were confident that it was working properly, we were able to push it to them. And our adoption was the day after we had B2W up here for training. We were pretty well lights off on our old system, lights on our new system, because we'd already done that work ahead of time, and we're able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great practice. So you created champions, you became experts before letting everybody loose on it, and it also made it part of the culture. It sounds like it's sort of part of the religion of how you estimate, right, and the process that you go through. So those are great strategies. Any other thoughts on things you can do to ensure success, Michelle or Sean?
And for us, another big part of it is not just keeping it with the estimating team and seeing what didn't work before with our project manager so that we could cut it out before we got into another bad habit or something like that. So bringing feedback in from the end user after we win the job.
Oh, that's a great strategy. So, I think getting that feedback and seeing the result is something that we're actually going to talk about next too, which is reaping the rewards. I think that is the holy grail, right? That's ROI is the holy grail, and how the initiative met your original needs, like in the end, and what sorts of KPIs that you use to measure that, and if there have been any unexpected benefits. Sean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what we can do now is we can play. We can unbalance a lot more easily. To touch on the other point, we can show our PMs a clean display. We don't have to search around for information like we used to. If I forgot an item midline in a bid before, I'd have to end that. I'd have to input that at the bottom, and then it wouldn't be all together. Now, again, with the items and the tasks, we can just add a task to an item. We don't have to worry about anything like missing items or not being able to explain it kind of conclusively. We can go in and we can say, here is your pay item. This, and this are included. And to wrap it back around, to play with it, we can unbalance. If we think an item's going to overrun or underrun, we can play all the games that we need to do to make sure that we're covered and we're the most successful at the end of the contract that we can be.
Have you noticed an increase in bid acceptance and other KPIs?
Our hit rate has increased for sure. And again, with the track being implemented, our KPIs will be tracked a lot closer going forward. So that's another thing. We're gone from the kind of the knowledge vault and kind of seeking the Oracle's approvals. The senior operations guys, we can go back and we can say, okay, well, you know what? You're saying that we can only bid this at X per day for achievement. However, on our previous job, we got Y per day. So what's different here? It's a lot easier to challenge the tribal knowledge at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And always push for the improvements, of course.
Right, sure, yeah. Michelle, what have you seen? So how well did the initiative that you started out with, how did it meet your needs? And how do you measure it?
So it's helped us a lot. I know just as a basic amount of jobs that we've win, we've increased by about 7% since we started using the software. And that means that our estimators are able to put more detail and more time into making sure they're right. We currently have the track software as well, and it seamlessly just transfers right over. Our project managers can see at a glance what they've got going on, what they might want to tweak on how they're planning to do the work, and it opened up a lot of communication as well to make sure that everyone has a conversation about what's going on. So we saw it with our volume of bids that we're able to get out, with our percentage of awards that's happening, and we're profitable, we're more profitable from it, and that's the main goal from anything that we're doing in the company.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, when did you get the system up and running? I know you acquired it early last year, but when did you start actively using it for bidding?
So for track, we started December of 2017, and estimate was November of 2016. Was when we started having our bids going through, our estimates were running, and about a year later, we had enough data and we had enough experience with the program to launch the productivity tracking part of it as well.
Yeah, for our audience too, I realized we didn't really talk about track, but B2W Track is an element of the Unified One platform that B2W offers, and it's designed for field tracking, as you would imagine by the name, and analysis. So it can give you daily snapshots of progress on the job site. And we've just introduced some production targets capabilities and some other new features of that product. Well, so that's great. Thank you, guys. I think this takes us all through the steps at a very high level. And of course, thanks to Sean and Michelle for sharing their insights. But before we wrap up, here's just a quick summary of some of the important things we heard today. But I think in every case, making the move to estimating software for both Priestley and Birmingham gave them confidence that the calculations they were making were more accurate, gave them speed as well, and created more efficiencies. And I think, you know, their estimators could collaborate better on complex bids, and they could eliminate the need to reinvent the wheel relative to data, as Michelle mentioned, templates, and Sean mentioned, you know, shared data, and they could, you know, I think just achieve a higher result, as they pointed out. But so, you know, maybe that leap of faith was really just a leap forward, because, you know, as they pointed out, you know, when the computer does all the manual and repetitive work, more of their time can be spent on improving the process. So that's all good. Before we jump into questions, and there's probably many, I just want to say thanks to all of you too for joining us. I'd like to offer a free guide to evaluating estimating software. You can just visit our website at b2wsoftware.com, or drop me an email directly and after the session today, and I'll just send it right over. So anyway, thanks again for your time, and to the team at OnSite Magazine. Melissa and David, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if there are any questions for our panelists.
Hi, Lisa. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for a very informative presentation. I really enjoyed that. And also thank you to Melissa and Sean for your insights into how B2W has improved your estimating functionality. And yes, we do have a few questions. So what I will do is I will ask the question, and then if Melissa could respond first, and then Sean give his insights second, that would be tremendous. So the first question that I have on tap is, they are asking, are they using dedicated server internally or cloud-based services? So Melissa, if you could take that first.
We have an internal server that carries everything. So it had a dedicated server for a little while, and now we've merged onto a bigger, better server so that we can have the whole platform on one. So our dedicated server is in the office here.
Great.
Yeah,
Sean?
So we have a dedicated offsite server. We're continental, and our IT is offsite. So we have a data center in Toronto where our data sits.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And maybe if you can just check your audio, it's a little bit echoey, if you don't mind, for the next question. Thank you so much for that response. Next question, again, Melissa first, and followed by Sean. After you bought the software, realistically, how long did it take before all your estimators were using it the way that you had planned? Melissa.
Once we got all of our resources in, I guess is the biggest part, because we did an evaluation process on our cost first. We started one at a time with our estimators to make sure that we could put the most attention on each of them, learning how to use the software the way it needed to be used. So we started with our estimators that had kind of the least confidence in their skills with it, and they would have the longest to use it, and then be able to help each other as everything rolled out. So it took a little bit longer for us because we focused more on making sure everyone had a dedicated attention to getting set up and had dedicated training. So for us, it was from November to January, everyone was on it. So about 2 months, we rolled out kind of a week at a time.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And Sean, your thoughts?
So again, we were a little bit longer. We were from beginning to end. We were from February 1 to August 1, full rollout. That involved the internal selection process and the interviews with B2W and competition. That lasted until about mid-May. We had the purchase order written, I believe, by about June 1. And from that, we got the database. We started to populate our resource templates. That was done. There was a little bit of back and forth. There was, some issues on our end, unfortunately, but we resolved those. We had the product sitting ready to go on about June 1. And again, as I said, we did that month of shadow bids and training, and then full rollout for everybody was August 1. And here we are. We've been here since.
Excellent, very good. And just a quick reminder to our audience, there is a questions tab. If you have a question you'd like to type in, please do so. The next question, again, Melissa, then Sean, how much flexibility did you have in terms of customizing your bids, and can you give us an example? Melissa.
We actually have a lot of flexibility as a subcontractor as well. We're at mercy to what our clients are looking for on the bid. So we can break down all of our items and then choose on our bid form to only show a lump sum price. And during negotiation later on, we can break out different alternative solutions. We can do breakout pricing for different options, and it makes it really flexible. So an example of that is there's a grouping tool. So you can group all of your items and then show those just as their own or separate them out. So we get asked all the time for a lump sum price just for their tender form, and then afterwards they want to know exactly how much it is for interior stripping, how much it is for slab removal, and how much it is for backfilling later on, just in case they want to take a piece out and give it to another contractor. So.
Super, excellent. And Sean? Sean, did we lose you, or?
Sorry, I was still on mute. Very similar story. Very similar story. We're generally downline from the main contractors, from the general contractors. So with the tight marketplace as it is, everybody wants to peel the onion back. Everybody wants to see as many options as they can. And as I mentioned before, this really allows us the flexibility, whether we're running one alternate scenario or 6 alternate scenarios. We can get it done depending on complexity within minutes, or, for an extreme case, hours. Everything has been already vetted prior to that, so it's a very seamless transition, and we can see our margins updated live. We can see how much we stand to make, how much we stand what kind of risk there is if we remove one item or add another. We can constantly run live evaluations, which is very important to us.
Excellent, Sean. Thank you so much for that response. I think that we're out of questions at this time. Once again, I'd like to thank all of the folks who joined us today, who took the time out to listen in to the webinar. As I previously mentioned, I found it to be very informative, and having the customers online was a real asset in my opinion. So folks out there, if you want more information, as Lisa mentioned, b2wsoftware.com, and you can contact Lisa directly if need be. We will be sending out a copy of this presentation, so look for that, and again, share it with any folks that you may feel would benefit from this information as well. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to everyone for joining us, and I will conclude today's webinar. Thank you.